Welcome to my Bake Escape. I am excited to share this week's recipe with you. In honor of spring, I have made pastel colored Mexican conchas. This recipe is advanced, but please do not be discouraged. If you follow the steps in the video and the recipe on my website, you can make these too. Each step is simple, and when you begin shaping these cute little pastries, it can be a lot of fun. For the recipe, visit mybakeescape.com. If you enjoy baking content, please subscribe to my channel and share with your friends and family. I appreciate the support. You can also follow me on Instagram and Pinterest at mybakeescape. All right, let's get started. So this recipe does require yeast, and if you haven't worked with yeast before, I highly encourage you to activate the yeast prior to using it. What you need is warm milk. The milk has to be between 105 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. You're also going to need some granulated sugar and the active dry yeast. So what you're going to do is add the sugar to the warm milk, mix that in. Then add the yeast, mix that in, and let it sit for about 10 minutes so that it can activate or bloom. Once it reaches this stage, it's ready to be used in the recipe. As this recipe calls for an enriched dough, what that means is the dough has milk and eggs and butter, and so here are the ingredients for the dough. You're going to need all-purpose flour, granulated sugar, 2 whole eggs, 2 egg yolks, salt, vanilla, butter, and of course that yeast milk mixture. So to start, I use a large bowl and I place the flour inside of the bowl. You need a bowl large enough to mix all these ingredients together. Then I add the salt, followed by the granulated sugar. Whisk that together. Next, I combine the egg yolks with the whole eggs. Whisk that together. Doing this ahead of time will just help incorporate these wet ingredients a lot easier into the dough. Then I add the vanilla extract. You can actually flavor these with a lot of different flavors. You can add a little bit of almond extract, orange extract. Then I add the milk yeast mixture to the egg mixture. Whisk that together and then set it to the side. Next step, I need to cut this butter into the flour. So I cut the butter into little cubes. For adding it to the flour, it just helps mix it in a lot quicker. So you can use a pastry blender for this or 2 forks, but I decided to use my hands. So I have some gloves on and I'm just mashing this butter into the flour. It isn't a lot of butter, so the dough won't be noticeably wet because of the butter, but I just want to make sure that as much of the butter I can get incorporated into that flour, I try to do. And once it gets to about this stage, then it's time to work on adding the other ingredients. So I create a well in the middle of the flour, and then I pour that egg, milk, and yeast mixture into the center of the flour. Using this small spatula, I just work it in, trying to mix this all together. Eventually, all of this flour will be absorbed and you won't see any more flour. But this can take some time. So I do as much as I can with the spatula and then I move on to using my hands. This dough can be quite sticky. I have found that using gloves helps this process. The dough doesn't stick as much to the gloves as it does to my bare hands. And so I'm trying to work as much as I can in this bowl. And once I see that it has absorbed most of the flour, I transfer the dough to a work surface and I'm using a cutting board. I like to have a little bit of flour available just to sprinkle on the dough because it is a little sticky. I sprinkle flour on the work surface and now I begin to knead the dough. This dough takes about 10 to 12 minutes of kneading. You just want to knead the dough until it is smooth and soft, and when you press in, the dough bounces back. So you see how I press in here and there is no bounce back at all? That means this dough needs to be kneaded for a lot longer. In total, I think I was kneading this dough for about 12 minutes. As you knead the dough, if it begins to stick to the board, just add a little bit of flour at a time. You do not want to add tons of flour because it will end up changing the consistency of your dough. It will be a lot more of a tough dough and it'll be dry. So just add a little bit of flour at a time if you need to. I know there are different techniques to knead. This is what I find most comfortable. So I kind of just press down in the center, push out, fold in, press down in the center, push out, fold in. But I know there are different ways that you could knead dough. And see, it's not really sticking to the board as much. So I'm doing the check, and so I press in, and it's kind of coming back a little bit, but not like I want it to. So I continue to knead the dough. My arm was getting tired, so now I moved on to using both hands. So you see I press down and it does start to pop back up. So I'm ready to move on. So the next step is to allow this dough to rest for about 2 to 2.5 hours. So I lightly sprayed this glass bowl with nonstick cooking spray. And I'm going to place this ball of dough inside. I also like to add a little bit of butter on the outside of the dough just to keep it moist while it's rising. Just a little bit of butter rubbed around the outside. Then I cover this bowl with plastic wrap and I place in a warm, draft-free area in my kitchen. For me, that is my microwave. So while the dough is resting, I'm going to make that colorful sugar paste that goes on top of the conchas. For this, you will need flour, powdered sugar, unsalted butter, vanilla extract, and salt, and some of these different colors. So I'm using pastel colors for this. To the flour, I added the salt, and then I add the powdered sugar. And with my hands, I'm just mixing this together. Then I'm going to do the same thing I did with the dough, is I'm going to mash this butter into this flour and sugar mixture until it forms into a dough. And this is going to need to be a pliable dough because you'll need to roll it out with a rolling pin. And eventually, after some time, it will come together. I realized that this bowl was a little too small, so I had to transfer this into a larger bowl so that I can really get my hands in there and incorporate that butter into the flour sugar mixture. Once most of the butter has been mixed in, I add the vanilla extract and then continue to mix in with my hands. And after some time, you will see that it will start to form into a dough and it will stick to itself. Once it comes together in your hands and stays like this, kind of like a Play-Doh, it's ready. So I gather all of this dough together in the bowl, transfer it to a cutting board, and this is my work surface for this part of the recipe. I just need to form this dough into a ball, then shape it into a disc, and then that will help me determine how to split this up into the segments that I need. You can split this into however many colors you plan to use for the conchas. So for this recipe, I am using 4 different colors. So to split this into 4 segments, I roll the dough into a log shape, cut it down the center, and then cut each part in half, and that gives me 4 pieces. Well, I am going to add a lot of color to these, so to stop the color from spreading everywhere and staining the cutting board, I lay down a piece of plastic wrap and I add a few drops of color at a time, mix it in. If I need more color, I add a little bit more until I reach the desired color. This does take a little bit of a time, so just be patient. I'm wearing gloves again because the color will get all over your hands and it will come off eventually, but using gloves just makes this process a little cleaner. Once I incorporate all of the color into the dough, I go ahead and wrap this piece of dough in plastic wrap and set it to the side while I continue adding color to the other segments. For this recipe, I'm using a teal blue, pink, purple, and yellow. So the dough has rested for about 2.5 hours and it has doubled in size. Now it's time to shape this dough into the small individual concha shapes. So I placed the dough on a clean cutting board and I added a little bit of flour, just a little bit to help so that it doesn't stick to the cutting board. And then I split this into 8 pieces. I'm going to make 8 conchas with this recipe. Normally I would cut up each piece and weigh it so that they're all the same size. Today I was kind of racing the clock for sunlight, so I eyeballed it. And what I do is I bring the dough together into a ball and I kind of pinch the center and then I roll it on the cutting board. My goal was to shape these into egg shapes for Easter. At first, the shape looked really good, but then once they rested again and baked, they kind of turned into more oblong circles. So either way, they turned out good, but that's what I was trying to do at this point, was shaping them into eggs. Again, I gather each segment of the dough and I kind of pinch it into the center, turn it over, roll it using the palm of my hand, like cupping it, kind of pressing down slightly, and then shaping it. Now that I've shaped each of the balls of dough, it's time to work on that sugar topping. So I add a little bit of flour and place the sugar topping ball of dough on top and roll it out into an even layer. And I like to use a large round cookie cutter to cut away the excess sugar. Then I place this on top of the dough, press down slightly, and I have this special concha cutter that I got on Etsy, and I could link the shop in the description of this video. And I just kind of press down on that and it makes that really pretty shell shape. Then I use my hands to kind of press that sugar topping into the dough, and I decided to get rid of the excess, so I used the cookie cutter to cut away all of that excess sugar. You can also use a knife if you don't have the cutter. You can use a small like paring knife, or if you have an X-Acto knife, you can do that to cut the shape into the sugar topping. Then I gather the rest of that sugar topping, roll it back up into a ball, and then continue to use it for the next one. This is a lot of fun. The dough is slightly sticky. It might stick to the board, so I do add a little bit of flour before rolling it out. And I like using that cookie cutter because it helps remove a lot of that excess dough, and it makes transferring the sugar topping to the dough easier. Sometimes the sugar topping will tear. It's no big deal. You just roll it back up into a ball of dough and start again. So I went ahead and took my time and cut out the sugar topping for each of these balls of dough. Once covered with the sugar topping, these are going to go on a parchment lined cookie sheet to rest while I work on the rest of the conchas. You can get as creative as you'd like with this. You can flavor the sugar topping with different flavors, like a traditional concha, I believe, has a slight cinnamon flavor in the sugar topping. So you could do that. You can flavor these with any type of extract. You can also add like fresh orange zest or lemon zest to the actual dough itself to give it that flavor. These are a lot of fun to make, and they do take time. You have to be patient, but the result is super delicious and so cute. So for the last ones, I decided to combine all 4 colors, kind of like an Easter egg, how you would dye an egg. So that was the color and the theming I was going for. So I just laid a strip of each color next to each other, pressed it down slightly, and then rolled it out. And this is what they look like after all the sugar topping has been added. These are going to rest and rise for a second time. I cover the entire sheet with plastic wrap and place in a warm area in my kitchen. So this time I place these in my oven. I do have a proofing setting on my oven, so I had that set, but you can just place them in your oven for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes until they puff up slightly and look like this. And you'll see some of that sugar has spread out a little bit because the dough has risen under it. And these are going to bake in a 325-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 15 to 18 minutes. I like to check on them after about 8 minutes, and I do rotate the pan so that they can bake evenly. So this is after 12 minutes, this is what they look like. And I believe they baked for another 6 minutes, so for a total of 18 minutes. Once baked, transfer the pan to a cooling rack and let the conchas sit on the pan for about 5 minutes, and then carefully using a spatula transfer them to a cooling rack so that they continue to cool down. Don't they look so cute? I think my favorite are the multicolored ones. You want to let these cool for about 15 minutes. They are going to be really warm when they come out of the oven. You can enjoy them then, but I would suggest to let them cool for about 15 minutes on the cooling rack. They baked perfectly. They're golden brown on the bottom. That sugar topping has set, and they look beautiful. These are the perfect spring conchas. I'm really happy with how they turned out. How beautiful would these look on your table for Easter brunch? These would make the perfect little pastry to add to your celebration. Of course, I couldn't wait to split it down the middle, and you can see that the dough is nice and soft, and it is a little like spongy, I think, from the eggs and the milk and the butter. It lends to a nice, tender, moist dough. It has a great flavor, but combined with that sugar topping, it just comes together so well. Conchas are my favorite when I go to a Mexican bakery, but making them at home fresh like this, nothing compares. They are delicious. These are great on their own, but my favorite way to eat a concha is with a cup of hot coffee or hot chocolate. I like to dip the concha in that hot chocolate or coffee and take a bite. It's just such a delicious treat. I'm happy with the way that these turned out. Be sure to visit my website, mybakeescape.com, for the recipe, and I have a lot more delicious recipes on there. I've actually made conchas previously on my channel, so there are a few more recipes you can check out as well. Let me know in the comments if you make these, and also let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer and help you. These are best enjoyed the day of, but they will last for about 3 days on the counter in an airtight container. So I store these in an airtight container. And by day 3, what I like to do is pop one in the microwave for a few seconds just to warm them up, and they are delicious. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to subscribe, and I appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and have a sweet day.
Qué bonito es lo bonito, qué bonito es el amor. No traiciona ni condena, solo llena el corazón. Qué bonito es lo bonito.